The digital clock on the bedside table glowed at 4:37 a.m. Amara stared at the numbers, a cold, hard knot tightening in her stomach. It was now or never. The air in her lavish, gilded prison, Jun Suk's mansion, felt suffocating, every velvet curtain and polished marble floor mocking her supposed comfort. She moved with a practiced silence she'd learned from weeks of suppressed panic, her movements honed by the simple, desperate desire for freedom. She slipped into a dark sweater and jeans, retrieved her small purse, and slid her worn, plastic-covered hospital ID into the interior zip pocket. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, loud drumbeat in the stillness. Just get to the gate. Don't look back. The mansion was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that suggests a watchful presence. She navigated the long, echoing corridors, the moonlight slanting through the towering windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cold air. Each step was a gamble. She reached the colossal main doors, her hand trembling as she pulled them open just enough to slide through, stepping out onto the cobblestone drive. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rich, damp earth. The gate, a wrought iron fortress that separated her from the city, was only 100 yards away. She began to walk, slowly at first, then quickening her pace, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The gate grew closer, promising salvation. And then, from the shadows of the guardhouse, 2 enormous figures materialized. "Dr. Park," the first guard said, his voice a low, polite rumble that held the finality of a prison door slamming shut. Amara froze, her shoulders slumping not in defeat, but in a sudden, sickening realization. "Good morning," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm taking an early walk." The second guard, a man whose neck was thicker than her thigh, didn't smile. He merely held up a discreet black tablet. "We apologize, Doctor. Mr. Seo has placed your name on a restricted list as of 2 a.m. this morning. Access outside the main estate perimeter is currently not permitted." "A restricted list?" Amara's blood ran cold. "I'm not a prisoner. I'm a medical professional. I am leaving." The first guard took a step closer, his eyes unblinking, his tone softening only in pitch, not intent. "We understand you need to leave. We respect you greatly. However, our orders are absolute. If you try to force the gate, we will be required to physically restrain you. And Mr. Seo would be very disappointed if you had to return in a way that wasn't dignified." The casual threat was a punch to the gut. Amara knew this was not a negotiation. She felt the true, heavy weight of her situation for the first time. It wasn't just a rich man's whims. It was legal and physical entrapment. She was trapped. She was escorted back, her few belongings feeling suddenly pathetic and useless. The mansion, when she re-entered it, wasn't a house anymore. It was a gilded cage. Hours later, the morning had passed in a blur of hollow formality. Amara found herself standing in Jun Suk's private office, a minimalist room of dark wood and glass that overlooked a manicured landscape, beautiful and entirely inaccessible. He sat behind his desk, not like a criminal boss, but like a CEO, his posture immaculate, his expression one of calm, calculated amusement. He didn't offer her a seat. "Amara," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "You attempted to leave." She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I am leaving, Jun Suk. I completed the stabilization phase for your son. My contract is complete." He leaned back, a faint, condescending smile touching his lips. "Ah, the contract. A funny thing, paper. You recall the fine print, of course? The addendum regarding extraordinary services rendered and unforeseen liabilities. I recall the part where I was hired to be a doctor, not an indentured servant," she shot back, her hands clenching at her sides. Jun Suk picked up a slender file, its cover stamped with the logo of the hospital where she had worked. "You had a considerable amount of student debt, Amara, and a few outstanding medical bills for your late mother. A noble sacrifice, that was. A crushing financial burden, less so." He slid the file across the desk. It was open to a single page, a bank statement. "Read the figure at the bottom." Amara's eyes scanned the numbers. Her breath hitched. The statement showed a balance of 0. The full, crushing weight of her debt was gone. Who paid this?" she whispered, a chilling premonition seizing her. "I did," he replied simply, as if discussing the weather. "Consider it an investment in my son's future. And in yours. Your debts are now paid off. By me. Which, in the more literal, less emotional reading of the term, means you now owe me." Rage, pure and scalding, erupted in her chest, momentarily overpowering the fear. "You manipulative bastard. You think you can buy my life? You can't put a price on my freedom. He rose slowly, his towering presence filling the space, his amusement fading into something cold and dangerous. He walked around the desk until he stood just a foot away from her. I didn't buy your life, Amara. I bought your time. And your focus. You signed the contract, Dr. Park. A contract you, with your professional integrity, were too arrogant to read properly. It states that all financial assistance rendered by Mr. Seo during the term of employment extends the contractual period indefinitely until such time as the debt is deemed repaid through continuous service. He paused, his dark eyes boring into hers. You will stay until I say you can leave. And since my son is not yet healed, I will not be saying that for a very long time. He was calm, collected, and utterly ruthless. The contract, the unread fine print she'd scoffed at weeks ago, had just become the bars of her cell. The mansion, now a known prison, felt suddenly populated by ghosts. Amara retreated to her room, her mind racing. She had to get a message out. She grabbed her smartphone and immediately tried calling her best friend, a pediatric nurse named Wayung. Dialing. The call connected, but before Wayung could pick up, a mechanical voice cut in. Security restriction engaged. Call cannot be completed without security approval. She tried her former department head, then a former colleague, the same sterile message every time. Her phone wasn't blocked, it was monitored and restricted. She could receive calls, but she couldn't initiate a single one that mattered. Desperate, she slipped out to the ground floor, finding an antique rotary landline tucked away in a quiet library nook. Her fingers trembled as she began to dial the emergency police number. A shadow fell over her. It was Mrs. Choi, a quiet, elderly maid who rarely spoke but always seemed to be watching. Mrs. Choi stood next to a towering bookshelf, dusting a volume that looked untouched for a decade. The phone, Mrs. Choi murmured, not looking at Amara, her voice barely a breath. It is monitored. They hear everything, Dr. Park. Everything. Amara felt a cold wave wash over her. She slowly lowered the receiver. The maid finally looked up, her old eyes filled with a deep, weary sorrow. People who try to leave disappear. She paused, lowering her duster. There was a bodyguard. Mr. On. Very loyal. Tried to take his wife and run a few months ago. Said he was tired of the dirty hands. Later that night, Amara was staring out her window when she saw it. A sleek, black SUV speeding down the drive, tires kicking up gravel. It disappeared into the night. An hour later, it returned. Amara watched through her blinds. The driver's seat was empty. Another guard emerged from the passenger side, his face grim. The air thickened with unspoken dread. The whispers of the staff, usually kept to hushed Korean only she understood, reached her now like cold wind. They found Mr. On. Jun Suk always knows. The silent return of the empty black SUV was more terrifying than any scream. It wasn't just a rumor of a former bodyguard who betrayed Jun Suk. It was a visible, final, and chilling warning. Amid the terror, Amara focused all her energy, her desperate need for normalcy and purpose, into the one person who needed her, Minho. Her patient, her sole anchor. She spent hours with him in the sunlit conservatory, a place of vibrant green life in the heart of the desolate mansion. She didn't just administer his medication. She sat on the floor and helped him build towers with wooden blocks. She read him stories in funny voices, and she taught him how to draw faces with real expressions, not just empty circles. The change in him was astonishing. The boy who barely spoke now engaged in small, halting conversations. He began to trust her deeply, a fragile, precious bond forged in a place of deep darkness. One afternoon, he was drawing a picture, a thick, black crayon figure wielding a stick. He giggled, a tiny, rare sound that made Amara's heart clench with fierce protective instinct. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" she asked gently, tracing the outline of his small hand. Minho frowned, his innocent face suddenly clouding. "That's Mr. Choi," he whispered, pointing to the drawing. "He's mean." "Why is he mean?" The boy looked around nervously, even though they were alone. He leaned close to Amara's ear, his breath warm and moist. "Daddy's men hurt people," he confided, his voice trembling. "I hear the noises late at night. The bad noises. Not screams, but bangs. And then the next day, they look sad." Amara felt a cold dread trickle down her spine. "Do they hurt you, Minho?" He shook his head vehemently. "No, never me. But when Daddy is angry, no one sleeps." He paused, gripping her hand tightly. "Sometimes he talks really loud on the phone. And then he hangs up, and he just sits in the dark. And then everyone is quiet for a long time. The realization hit Amara with the force of a physical blow. Minho's severe anxiety, his intense fear of strangers, his withdrawn state, it wasn't just trauma from his mother's death or a general fear of the outside world. It was a trauma rooted inside the mansion. He wasn't afraid of strangers, he was terrified of his father's world. Jun Suk wasn't just a grieving parent. He was an active source of the boy's distress. The monster Amara had feared was the same man her patient feared. A few nights later, the facade of Amara's confinement was tested in the most public way. Jun Suk invited her to a formal dinner, an intimate gathering with 3 of his most influential business associates. The entire event was a meticulously orchestrated test, a display of ownership and control. She was told, not asked, to wear a simple, elegant black dress and to sit directly beside him at the head of the long mahogany table. Her mission: smile, nod, and play the role of the trusted woman, the doctor, the confidant, the keeper of his most vulnerable secret, his son. The air in the dining room was thick with the scent of expensive wine and old money. The conversation flowed in guarded, coded language, deals, shipments, and veiled threats. Amara kept her smile fixed, her posture straight, feeling like a high-stakes accessory. Then, one of the associates, a heavily jowled man named Mr. Kong, raised a challenging eyebrow at Jun Suk. "Jun Suk is I," Kong purred, his eyes sliding over Amara with a dismissive scrutiny. "Forgive me, but I find myself curious. You've never brought company to these dinners. What is the presence of the lovely doctor meant to signify?" The silence that followed was instant and absolute, a tangible entity that choked the room. Amara's breath hitched. She knew this was it. The moment she'd be exposed as a glorified employee, or worse, a captive. Jun Suk didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He merely turned his head, his face a mask of complete, glacial serenity. He fixed Mr. Kong with a single, cold glare that seemed to drain the color from the man's face. "It signifies, Mr. Kong," Jun Suk's voice was low, measured, and devastatingly final, "that Dr. Park is vital to my well-being and the stability of my household. And in my world, there is nothing more important than stability." He took a slow, deliberate sip of his water, never breaking eye contact with the now stammering associate. "Do not mistake a quiet presence for a negligible one. She is here because she belongs here, and I suggest you treat her as such." Mr. Kong stammered an apology and quickly changed the subject. The atmosphere, however, had fundamentally shifted. Everyone at the table, including Amara, understood the warning. She was untouchable. In that moment of pure, terrifying power, Amara felt a perverse, momentary wave of relief. She was still trapped, but she was also protected. She was no longer just a doctor. She was a piece of Jun Suk's public image, a component of his life he had publicly declared worthy of defense. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had solidified her role, for better or worse, within the impenetrable walls of the CO empire. The second the dinner concluded and the associates had departed, Amara confronted him in the deserted drawing room. The polite smiles were gone, replaced by mutual fury. "You used me," she hissed, tearing off the expensive silk shawl the maid had given her. "I am not your showpiece. I am not your property." Jun Suk stood by the fireplace, his hands thrust into his trouser pockets, his shoulders rigid. "Do you think I enjoyed that, Amara? Do you think I parade you around for my own amusement? I don't know what you enjoy, Jun Suk, because I don't know who you are. You know enough to keep trying to run," he stated bluntly. He didn't deny her accusation of ownership. Instead, his eyes narrowed, and a sudden, sharp calculation entered his expression. He took a slow step toward her. "You're right," he said, his voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous register. "You're not my property. Property can be sold, destroyed, or replaced." He closed the distance between them, his intensity radiating off him like heat. "You're much more valuable than that. And that's exactly why I can't let you go." He didn't offer an apology, he offered a life. He painted a picture of a future that, despite her hatred, was strangely alluring. "Stay," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Give up this foolish obsession with a freedom you will never truly know out there. I will give you more than just a job. I'll give you a life of luxury, of protection. You'll have a status that is untouchable." He gestured around the drawing room, to the wealth, the power, the sheer, unimaginable scale of his influence. No more struggling to pay bills. No more waking up terrified of what tomorrow will bring. You will be safe, Amara. Minho will be safe. You can spend your life healing him, knowing that out there, my enemies will never touch you. The offer was a gilded trap, but the gold was real. She was a healer, a protector, and he was offering her the power to truly protect her patient, the boy she had come to love. "And the condition?" she asked, her voice tight, knowing the answer already. "One condition," he confirmed, his face unyielding. "Complete loyalty. Your life is here now. Your purpose is here. You stay, you belong, and you stop trying to undermine my authority. You stop trying to leave. Is that too high a price for complete security?" The tension in the room was a physical thing, taut and agonizing. He wasn't just offering a job. He was offering a devil's bargain, a life built on comfort and fear. Later that night, the mansion was shrouded in a restless silence. Amara couldn't sleep. She walked down the long hall toward Minho's wing, intending only to check on him. She stopped outside his open door, her breath catching in her throat. Jun Suk was sitting on the edge of Minho's bed, his massive frame hunched, looking smaller and less formidable than she had ever seen him. The overhead lights were off. Only the soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminated the scene. He was gently reading a story, his deep voice softened into a gentle, rhythmic cadence. He wasn't discussing business or issuing threats. He was reading about a small, lost bear finding his way home. She watched, unseen, as he reached out and softly tucked the blanket around the sleeping boy, his expression devoid of the cold mask he wore for the world. It was a rare, human moment, a flash of a broken father trying and tragically failing to be a source of solace and stability in the only way he knew how, by being present, even if he was still the source of the underlying terror. Amara leaned against the doorframe, her legs suddenly weak. She had spent weeks cultivating a pure, clean hatred for the monster who imprisoned her. Hate was simple when the enemy was a heartless villain. But what if he wasn't? What if the same man who terrified his staff and controlled her life was also a man who genuinely loved his son? A man who had simply lost his moral compass in a desperate attempt to create a secure bubble for the one thing he couldn't bear to lose. This complicated everything. The hatred, the clear path to righteousness and escape, blurred into a messy, frightening dread. The bars of her prison were no longer just iron. They were woven with empathy. The shattering of glass and the thunderous, echoing boom ripped through the quiet night. The entire mansion shook. Amara was thrown from her bed, the sheer force of the explosion deafening. Security alarms screamed to life, a shrill, manic cry that drowned out all other noise. A car exploded outside the main gate. The explosion was a violent punctuation mark on their tenuous peace. Amara scrambled to her feet as Jun Suk's chief of security burst into her room, his face pale and grim. "Dr. Park, we are in lockdown. Enemies are testing the perimeter. We believe it's the Kwangsu group." "What does that have to do with me?" Amara demanded, pulling a robe around herself. "They know you're the only person who can truly reach Minho SSI," the guard explained grimly. "They believe you are Mr. Seo's new vulnerability. They found out about the doctor. Immediately, the control tightened to a stranglehold. Guards were stationed inside her wing. They followed her everywhere. She was no longer simply monitored. She was under constant, suffocating guard. Later, when the chaos had subsided into a nervous lull, Jun Suk came to her room. He didn't knock. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes etched deep with stress. He dismissed the two guards at her door with a curt wave and stepped inside. "I need you to listen to me, Amara," he said, his voice flat and drained. "Listen to what? That your endless parade of enemies has finally brought their war to your doorstep," she shot back, shaking with fear and indignation. He didn't argue. He only looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a raw, desperate honesty. "You're not a guest anymore, Amara. You are a leverage. A piece of me they know I value. And they will use you against me." He walked to her window and stared out at the now silent darkness. "You are the only person who has ever made my son smile in a year. They know that. They know that if they take you, I will break the only rule I have left, never show weakness. They want me to bleed. And now, you are the blade they will use." A paralyzing, cold finality settled over Amara. She was not just trapped, she was a target, a bargaining chip in a war she hadn't signed up for. The explosion was her new reality. Her life, Minho's life, their very existence, was now defined by the threat outside their walls. The next morning, the air was thick with whispered panic. Amara was in the library, trying to distract herself with a book she couldn't focus on. She heard low voices in the adjacent parlor, voices belonging to two senior security personnel. The walls in the old mansion were thick, but the fear in their tone made their words pierce the silence. The plan is confirmed. They're hitting the south wing tomorrow night. They don't want the money or the territory, one voice murmured. They want the boy. It's payback. And the doctor? The other voice asked, fear lacing his tone. She's the bait. Use her to draw out Mr. Seo. But if they succeed, if they take Minho. The first voice dropped to a chilling whisper. Mr. Seo gave the order already. If the boy is compromised, or if any rival steps inside, he will erase every witness. Every single person who knows the internal structure, every guard who fails, and even the staff. He cannot allow a security breach of this magnitude to survive. Amara's blood turned to ice. Erase every witness. She was not just leverage, she was a liability. If the rivals succeeded, she would be gone. If they failed, she would be gone because she knew too much. She slipped quietly out of the library, her mind working with frantic, terrifying clarity. Escape wasn't a desire anymore. It was the only possible path to survival. But she wouldn't run alone. She went to Minho's room. He was sitting on the floor, coloring. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and trusting. She sat down and took his hand. Minho, she whispered, urgency vibrating in her voice. We're going to play a new game. A very secret game. A plan, desperate and terrifying, began to form in her mind, a frantic weaving of half-formed ideas. She didn't know the layout of the entire city, she didn't have a car, she had no contacts outside the mansion, and she had 2 fully armed guards watching her every move. The odds were impossible. In a chilling final moment, she pressed her forehead against Minho's, a silent vow of protection. The choice was brutally simple, survival through insane risk or certain slow death. She straightened up, looking out the window at the distant, indifferent city lights. The final, terrible truth settled over her. If we stay, we die slowly, she whispered to the boy, who watched her with innocent confusion. If we run, we die fast. But either way, we're running. The attack came not in the deep of night, as anticipated, but at dusk, during the changing of the guard shifts. Amara had been preparing to start her desperate plan, her bag of necessities hidden under her mattress, when the world exploded. A deafening volley of automatic gunfire ripped through the south wall. Alarms shrieked. The lights flickered, plunged into darkness, and then snapped back on, bathing the hall in a harsh, epileptic glare. Minho! Amara screamed, throwing herself toward the boy's room. She burst in to find him huddled under his desk, his small body shaking violently. The rival gang had struck. A wall of noise, shouts, explosions, and the brutal rhythm of combat erupted outside. Amara grabbed Minho, pulling him into her arms. She remembered the chief of security had once pointed out a hidden panic room disguised as a bookcase in Minho's study. It's a game, Minho. A loud one. We have to hide, she cried, running to the bookcase. Her fingers fumbled for the hidden latch. Click. The case swung inward, revealing a small, steel-reinforced safe room. She shoved Minho inside. Don't make a sound. Don't move. I'll be right back, she instructed, her voice raw with terror and adrenaline. She slid the bookcase shut, hearing the lock thunk into place. She didn't run. She stood in the center of the room, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. She was bait, and she was going to be caught. The door to the study burst inward. 3 heavily armed men, clad in black tactical gear, stormed in. They weren't looking for a fight. They were looking for a child. Where is he? Where's the boy? The leader barked, his rifle leveling at Amara. I don't know what you're talking about, she lied, her voice shaking but defiant. Liar. He strode toward her, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her back. You're the doctor. The precious one. Tell us where the boy is, or I'll use you to send a message to the great Jun Suk. Before he could finish, a new wave of chaos erupted in the hall. The sounds of a ferocious, desperate battle were now centered right outside the study. Stop! A voice bellowed, a voice that was all granite and thunder. Jun Suk. He stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his face slick with sweat and grime, holding a combat rifle that looked like an extension of his own terrifying power. He was flanked by his remaining elite guards. The leader holding Amara laughed, a rough, ugly sound. Well, look what the commotion dragged in. Perfect. We take the boy, you take the doctor. Fair exchange, Seo. The leader pressed the barrel of his rifle against Amara's temple. Amara closed her eyes, preparing for the end. Drop the weapon, Seo, the man commanded. Or I blow a hole in the head of your son's pretty little healer. Jun Suk's face, usually a mask of control, shattered. Amara, even with a cold piece of metal against her skull, saw it, pure, terrifying fear. It was not the fear of losing a battle or an empire. It was the raw, primal terror of losing her. His hand, which had been clutching the rifle, slowly relaxed. He looked from Amara's terrified face to the rifle pressed against her. He took a staggering breath. He let the rifle clatter to the ground, a loud, echoing sound of surrender. The great, untouchable Jun Suk had dropped his weapon and surrendered to save her. The battle ended in a brutal, bloody mess. Jun Suk's men had quickly overwhelmed the intruders once the boss was safe. Minho was retrieved from the panic room, crying but unharmed, and rushed to a secured section of the mansion. Amara was pulled into a quiet, shadowed corridor. Her knees were weak, her heart still beating a manic rhythm. She was alive, but the image of Jun Suk's face, the terror, the surrender, burned behind her eyelids. She didn't wait for him to speak. "I was ready to run, Jun Suk," she whispered, her voice a low, fierce tremor. "You know that, don't you? I had a plan. I was going to take Minho and disappear. I was done being your hostage, your doctor, your collateral. I was done." She stepped forward, forcing him to meet her gaze. "But you risked everything for me. You dropped the weapon. You were ready to die to save me, not your son, but me. Why?" The question hung heavy, thick with accusation and confusion. She had expected him to deny it, to say it was a strategy, to claim she was necessary for Minho's care. But the mask he had worn for a decade, the impenetrable veneer of the crime lord, shattered. He looked away, running a scarred, shaking hand through his hair. "My wife," he started, his voice a guttural rasp she barely recognized. "She was murdered because of my choices. A rival gang. They targeted her, thinking I'd crumble. They were right." He turned back to Amara, and his eyes were raw, filled with the ghost of his past sorrow. "I swore I would never, ever care about anyone again. It was my protection. A life of power without attachment. It was the only way to survive in this world. I swore to be heartless. I swore to be an invulnerable monster." He stepped toward her, stopping inches away, his towering presence suddenly feeling small and utterly vulnerable. "Then you came here, Amara. You looked me in the eye and hated me. You fought me. You didn't tremble or flatter. You just healed him. You broke my rules. You made my son smile." He leaned in, his confession desperate, an agonizing truth torn from his soul. "I don't know when I stopped seeing you as a prisoner. I don't know when the thought of losing you became worse than the thought of losing my entire empire." He reached out, his hand trembling as he gently touched her cheek, his thumb tracing a path down her jaw. "All I know is, I can't lose you." The confession was a cataclysm. It didn't solve anything, but it was a release. The deep well of hatred Amara had nursed for him finally dried up, replaced by a torrent of confusing, overwhelming emotion. Over the next few weeks, the mansion began a slow, agonizing transformation. Jun Suk didn't suddenly become a saint, but the shift was undeniable. He began the painful process of dismantling pieces of his criminal network. The most violent operations were shut down. The illicit funding dried up. He wasn't leaving the game entirely, but he was stepping away from the brutality, focusing on legitimate, or at least less violent, business ventures. He was creating a safer environment for Minho and for Amara. The guards became less aggressive, their demeanor shifting from vigilant jailers to discreet protectors. The atmosphere in the mansion, once thick with paranoia, began to thin. It felt less like a prison and more like a vast, heavily secured, and deeply complicated home. Crucially, he began to treat her differently. He stopped commanding. He started asking. He invited her to meals, not as a showpiece, but as an equal. He asked her opinion on his business decisions, surprising her with his willingness to listen. "Do you think this new venture is too exposed?" he'd ask, waiting for her answer. "I think any venture you own is too exposed right now," she'd reply, holding nothing back. He'd nod, considering her words. The small changes were profound. He was valuing her counsel and, more frighteningly, her presence. Their relationship evolved in a slow, agonizing dance. The tension that had been fueled by fear and hatred now curdled into something else, trust and a burgeoning longing. It finally broke one afternoon during a fierce, almost therapeutic argument over Minho's care. "You have to stop shielding him from everything," Amara insisted, standing toe-to-toe with him in the library. "He needs structure. He needs to go outside, even with guards. He's not going to heal locked away in here. And risk him being taken again?" Jun Suk roared, his fists clenched. "I will not stand by and watch my son become a tool for my enemies. You don't understand my world, Amara. I understand the world of a traumatized child, she shot back, her voice shaking with passion. And you are smothering him with your fear. You're not protecting him, you're building his cell. The intensity of their shared frustration, their deep, absolute care for the same boy, snapped the barrier between them. She was so close, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a fierce, moral conviction that made him lose his footing. The anger in his face dissolved, replaced by a naked, yearning sadness. He didn't want to fight her anymore. He never did. His eyes dropped from her face to her lips, and the air crackled. She saw the shift, saw the desire, and for one terrifying, confusing second, she didn't pull away. He reached out, cupped her face, and then, with a low, desperate moan that was more admission than embrace, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of control, but one of raw, undeniable passion, desperate, inevitable, and utterly disarming. When he pulled away, both of them were breathless, the argument forgotten, the world outside the room silenced. Amara leaned her forehead against his chest, her hands gripping the lapels of his jacket. I hated you, she choked out, the admission thick with tears she didn't know she was holding back. I hated the power you had over me. I know, he whispered, stroking her hair. But now, she pulled back, looking up at the man who had imprisoned her, who had terrified her, who had also saved her life and was now dismantling his own empire for her. Now, I see the man beneath the monster. The man who is trying. And I don't know how, but I think I've fallen in love with him. A rare, almost painful light entered Jun Suk's eyes. He held her tight, a desperate embrace that felt like clinging to the edge of a cliff. Your presence has changed everything, he confessed against her hair. You are the first person who has made me want to be better. Not for power, not for image, but for us. Months passed. The danger hadn't vanished, it never would, but it had receded, replaced by an uneasy, enduring peace. The estate felt different, softened by a genuine, shared purpose. One afternoon, Jun Suk found Amara sitting by the indoor pool, watching Minho swim a few tentative laps under the supervision of a kind, new guard. He sat beside her, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the water. I'm selling the majority of the old assets, he told her, his voice quiet. It's a huge loss, and it will weaken my hand with a few old rivals. But it cleans up the finances. It makes us legitimate. I'm proud of you, she said simply, resting her head on his shoulder. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. I have a lawyer arranging an official annulment of our original contract, he continued. It's signed, notarized. It means you are legally, financially, and completely free. He turned to her, his gaze steady and serious. I am not the same man who trapped you, Amara. I can't be. Not with you here. But you have a choice now. You can take the money I've already set aside for you, walk out that gate, and I swear, I will never send a man after you. You can have the freedom you always wanted. A fresh start. The life you put on hold. Amara looked at the gate, still immense and forbidding, but now unlocked for her. Freedom. The thing she had dreamed of every night for months. She hesitated, the weight of the choice pressing down on her. Could she walk away from the man who was rebuilding his life for her? Could she abandon the boy who finally felt safe? Minho, finished with his swim, climbed out of the pool, dripping wet. He saw them, smiled, and ran over, slipping and sliding a little on the wet stone. He didn't cling to just one of them. He wrapped his small, trusting arms around both of their legs, pressing his face into their thighs. Don't go, Dr. Mommy, he whispered, using the pet name he'd recently adopted. Please stay. Amara's heart gave a final, decisive lurch. She looked down at the boy, then up at Jun Suk, whose eyes were filled with anxious hope. The realization was crystal clear. The freedom she craved wasn't a location. It was a feeling. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a choice. She smiled, a genuine, joyful smile she hadn't felt in years. I'm not going anywhere, she told Minho, ruffling his wet hair. She looked into Jun Suk's relieved eyes. She had her answer. She was already home. Months later. The mansion was still massive, still guarded, but the internal atmosphere was unrecognizable. Jun Suk's empire was transformed, his power now focused on legal investments, his influence used for silent protection rather than overt violence. The name Seoul still commanded fear, but it was the quiet fear of untouchable wealth, not the terror of a gangster. Minho thrived under their shared, stable care. He was laughing often, speaking freely, and attending a small private school without the crippling anxiety that had once defined him. He was living without fear, a small, bright testament to their tumultuous journey. Amara was no longer a doctor on contract, nor was she a prisoner. She was a partner, a healer, and a force of moral clarity in Jun Suk's complicated world. She had what he never thought he deserved: love. They stood on the grand balcony one evening, watching the sunset paint the distant city skyline in gold and rose. He put his arm around her, holding her close. "I keep waiting for you to look at the gate again," he confessed, his voice warm with a residual vulnerability. Amara looked at the gate, then back at him. "It's just a gate now, Jun Suk. And it's open. But I don't need to walk through it to be free. I am free because I chose this." He turned her to face him, his eyes dark and full of profound gratitude. He took her hand, raising it to his lips and kissing her palm. "The day you climbed onto that stretcher and saved my life," he whispered, his heart finally exposed and utterly hers. "I thought you were saving my life. I didn't know you were about to become it. If you are here, it means you enjoyed every bit of the story. And guess what? More stories that are interesting than this drop on this channel daily. Subscribe now and turn on your notification button in order to get notified as soon as they drop."